Hello and welcome, I'm the Rambling Director, and I am back after another hiatus of being sick, and in addition to that, who would have thought being a dad takes a lot of your time? But I'm finally back, and I did some housework, and now I can introduce you to mine and my wife's little nerd corner. This is where we have a lot of our merchandise from our shared nerdy interests. As you can see, the majority of it is My Little Pony and Harry Potter, and I've talked a lot about My Little Pony on this channel. I've talked very little about Harry Potter, though. I did do a video briefly touching on something that I might talk about a little bit later in this video again, but this really is just kind of talking about and sharing my thoughts on the upcoming HBO series. I'm really excited for this series. The only negativity I've really heard around this idea of this series seems to come a lot from people who casually like the movies because they were related to their childhood, but are not huge fans of the books. In my personal life and online, I've really met very few people who are not excited about the idea of having a more accurate adaptation of these books. And especially people like me and my wife who are lifelong fans of these books. I think a lot of us have things about the movies that we really want to see done right, that were not done right in the films. I also want to just give a word of encouragement to, anybody who may see this, that may want to go and encourage the people at HBO to just kind of remember, it actually doesn't matter how many haters you have against JK, because the fans of the books are always going to be on the side of the books, even the people who do not like her. And we are going to make it a phenomenal success for HBO. So the hope is they don't start catering to any weirdness, especially now that we're finally getting beyond all of the woke, hypocritical nonsense in our movies. It seems like we're finally pushing past that. I know you get some stragglers here and there, but for the most part, we're kind of moving beyond that, which is a very good thing. I think it's also really good that we now live in a world where faithfulness to the books is kind of expected from an adaptation. And in fact, although we are willing to accept some reasonable changes for the sake of adapting, most of us will make a big stink about it, and the companies finally are able to hear us do that. So I think we have a pretty good chance of this being really good. But here are some of the things that I personally want to see from this series, and I really am passionate about these specific things. There's a few other things, but I've left them off for the sake of time, because this is already going to be a long video. I can just tell from the beginning. One, obviously, faithfulness to the book, and that includes some things that I really just was very disappointed by even when I was like 4 years old, 5 years old, and the first film came out. I wanted to see all of the trials in Philosopher's Stone. I wanted to see the potions trial. I wanted to see these little bits and bobs. I wanted to see the Death Day party in Chamber of Secrets. And I just feel like there were so many little subplots that, yeah, you could cut out. They don't really add that much to the plot, but it's just kind of a nice little way of adding to the characters. It's kind of like watching the extended cuts of Lord of the Rings, the only way to watch Lord of the Rings. And you're not really adding that much in terms of plot, but you get a lot more from the characters, and that's just as important. This is a big one for me. It's such a nitpicky little thing, but appropriate ages for the adult cast members. Look, I want to say this on no uncertain terms. Alan Rickman is incredible. Alan Rickman is one of my favorite actors, one of the most underrated actors of all time. He is too old to be Professor Snape. Okay, by the 7th film, he looked ancient. And the thing about Snape is that he was meant to be like 30 or 31 at the time of the Philosopher's Stone. I know it's kind of hard to imagine that because we've all been hardwired to see Alan Rickman, but he is just too old for that role. Harry's parents, way too old. I know in the first book we don't really get an indication of James and Lily's ages, nor Snape, but we do as the books go on. So now we have that hindsight. I want to see age-appropriate casting. On that note, there has been some talk about things like getting some of the cast, legacy casting, basically. Why don't we get Tom Feldman to come back and play Lucius? Just for the record, I'm on board with that. I've heard some talks about maybe Daniel Radcliffe should be the person to come back and play Snape. Don't think that should happen, but you know what would be cool? He could play Sirius Black, because Gary Oldman and Daniel Radcliffe are really good friends. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? And while we're at it, Rupert Grint could play Lupin. Why not? You know, I'm not against little fun things like that, where you give these actors a radically different role to play. I'm cool with that. Legacy casting is fine. I really want them to get away from, you know, the films as much as possible. Now, while we're on the topic of casting, before we leave, they have Jude Law as Dumbledore in the Fantastic Beasts movies. HBO has confirmed that the Fantastic Beasts movies are going to be finished, so I think that Jude Law needs to play Dumbledore in the series. Fantastic Beasts is considered canon to the books, right? So why not have him step in there? Then you have a young enough actor, all you have to do is make him look a little bit older, and boom, you suddenly have a consistency across this series that the entire first 8 movies were lacking. Snape and the Dursleys are way too nice in the movies. And I get it. When you're adapting a movie, you have way less time. So you have to, if you're going to redeem Snape, if you're going to redeem the Dursleys a little bit, they get a little redemption at the end. If you're going to redeem them at all, you have to make them somewhat nicer in the movies. Lots of movies do that. I understand. If we're going to have a whole mini-series for each book, then Snape should be cruel, because the books, he does a lot of cruel crap, but he has a lot more time for you to kind of see where he's coming from and kind of like him. Even if you just like to hate him, you have a lot more time with him. In the show, we're going to have a lot more time with him. I expect to see more of that. I expect to see more of the Dursleys. What was with Goblet of Fire, cutting them completely out of the opening? Goblet of Fire has one of the funniest openings in terms of the Dursleys ever, and it's completely cut out of the movies. Again, I understand, you got to make time, but in a series we have time, so I'd like to see more of that. And next, since we're talking about characters, I want a better Ron. Rupert Grint's a really good actor. The writing of Ron Weasley in the movies sucks. I know, a lot of people have probably said that, but it bears repeating until the writers of the HBO series lock it in their memory that Hermione is not the second coming of Jesus, and Ron is not the most useless of Screwtape's devils. I mean, I talk about it with my wife all the time. I rant with her about this, because it aggravates me so much. Half-Blood Prince, Hermione dictates the entire course of the next movie. We're coming with you. You don't think you're doing this alone, do you? Those lines in the book were said by Ron. And in that movie, Ron is sitting in the back in the shadows like a supervillain. Ron is an idiot most of the time. And it's a real shame, because if you've never read the books, you'd have no way of knowing that Ron is one of the best characters. Ron is kind of like the Sam of this series. I can make a whole video just about Ron Weasley and how passionately I feel they did his character wrong. I could do another video all about how passionately I feel they did Ginny dirty in these books, in these movies too, because the books, Ginny is one of the best characters. And I know she's kind of flat in the first few books because she's barely there. But by the time she becomes a main character, she's incredible. She's one of my favorite characters. And they do her so dirty. And I would love to see better Ron, definitely. And if you have time for it, throw in a better Ginny as well. Please, for the love of goodness, please. This next one's a little weird. But I think most of you are going to, even on a subconscious level, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Consistency in the design and in the cinematography. This series needs to have one director, or it needs to have a producer who really understands what they're doing and can make the visuals of every season line up together. Okay? Because you have the first 2 movies by Chris Columbus. Absolutely beautiful, enchanting, pretty much the tone, not exactly the images, but the tone that I read when I read the books. And from the 3rd movie onward, it gets so dark that by the 6th movie, I actually am having trouble seeing. I don't mean dark, like tonally. I expect that. I read the books. But physically, like, I can't make out what's on the screen sometimes. And I think that the best example of a series with a really dynamic understanding of exactly how to make this sort of consistency is a series of unfortunate events from Netflix. It has several different directors and several different writers, but it is a consistent vision from episode 1 to the end. That's what I want to see out of Harry Potter. These should not feel like 8 different directors are working on them. They should feel like one vision, even if you use multiple directors. So they need to have a cohesive vision. That means you need to plan out from episode 1 what the castle needs in in season 7. Because adding bridges, adding courtyards, adding clocks, taking away towers, changing the positioning of huts and back areas and forests and the entrance and the exits and the train station and the lake, changing the position of all this stuff really takes you out of the film. It doesn't feel like, ooh, a new area we haven't explored yet. It feels like, man, you couldn't have figured out a better place to graft that crap onto to make this movie happen, could you? And that should not be happening. So from episode 1, we need to have a cohesive vision. And while we're on that subject, again, get away from the movies. I really wish, I don't think they'll do it, because Warner Brothers has already built a theme park around the movies, and so the architecture is probably going to stay the same. But who here is with me on this? They should just redesign the whole castle. Redesign the robes, the uniforms. Speaking of the robes should be what they are in the book. Harry repeatedly is said to be wearing jeans. They don't need the school uniforms. But if you're going to ditch the school uniforms, keep the bloody robes. Because from movie 3 onward, there's so many scenes where they're not even wearing their robes. And the robes are what accentuate the wizarding world as different from the muggles in their dress code. Give you the example of chapter 1 of Philosopher's Stone. Vernon Dursley sees a bunch of people walking around in robes, and it's very odd to him. Why? Because they're not dressed like muggles. And McGonagall says to Dumbledore later, people are getting really reckless. This is bad news for us. You know what? We really need to get, like, they're out in broad daylight. Why would that be a problem? Because they're not dressed like muggles. So we need to see that. Next is character consistencies. And I'm not going to explain what I mean. I'm just going to read you off a list because I think most of you will immediately know what I'm talking about in essence. Hermione's teeth. She has buck teeth in the first movie, which makes Emma Watson talk like this all through the Philosopher's Stone. But then they ditch them, and we never get any explanation as to why her teeth shrunk. Madam Hooch. Simply existing would be nice after the first movie. Flitwick. I know, the choir director was meant to be a secondary character, and then people got confused, so they just changed Flitwick's look, but that should not be happening, okay? What you need to do is pick a look for Flitwick and keep it the same. Cornelius Fudge's age from Chamber of Secrets to the other movies, and in fact, all through the rest of the movies, his age varies wildly based on how they're feeling about doing his makeup and hair that day. Voldemort's appearance, obviously different actor in Philosopher's Stone, but you know what? Cast somebody from the beginning. I've heard Cillian Murphy is actually in talks about playing Voldemort. That'd be really awesome. I don't care who plays him, but he needs to be the same person, and the Voldemort on the back of Quirrell's head should not have a nose. Secondary thing about Voldemort, by the way, he should have red eyes, and they should be snake eyes, because that is how they are described. Tom the barkeeper. I don't care how you make him look. Make him a hunchback, make him a little person, I don't care, but just choose one and stick with it, because in Prisoner of Azkaban, I was always confused who that guy was supposed to be. Lavender Brown. I don't care what ethnicity you make her, just pick one and stick with it. Bill and George, just being there consistently and played by the same actors would be nice. The Fat Lady, again, cast somebody young enough that they're not going to die. It's really not that difficult. And finally, Griphook. Griphook is a completely different person. And I don't just mean the actor, but even the makeup is completely different on him from Philosopher's Stone to Deathly Hallows, and there's just not one reason that it should be that way. And by the way, we just need to completely redesign how the magic actually works in this series compared to the way it did in the movies. You'd actually save money if you did this. So for instance, the sort of thing that happens whenever they apparate that kind of makes them look like they're blue skidooing into a picture, just get rid of it. In the book, they turn, their cloaks twirl, and with a snap like a whip, they're gone. Do that. You'd actually save money and you'd be more accurate. Also, there's way too much of the wands connecting. It only happens a couple times in the books, and it happens for an actual reason. Like, that's just not how magic typically works. But even in the Fantastic Beasts movies, the wands are locking together with the spells, and that just doesn't happen that much in the books. Get rid of it. Every time, except for the few times it happens between Voldemort and Harry, that's the only times it should be happening. The very end battle, when it happens again, even though it makes no sense for those wands to be acting that way, cut it out. It doesn't need to be there. Now, this is kind of a weird one. I don't know if most people would agree with me on this one, but I want to see, since they've told us they're going to expand out the side characters, open the world up, everything from the books are going to be there, but they're going to give it more room to breathe. If they're going to do that, I really want to see some good Slytherins. You know, not somebody like Snape or Malfoy who kind of get a redemption. No, I want to see just good people from Slytherin. Otherwise, the criticism that everybody lobs against the series of like, okay, if you put all the bad kids in Slytherin, just get rid of the kids that go to Slytherin. Just send them home. Because if you don't see good Slytherins, that is what you're telling the audience. Because in a visual medium, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist. The movies add in a bunch of superfluous scenes that almost seem like cutscenes in a video game, or like side missions in cutscenes. They seem like cutscenes in a video game that are just there to add tension. So let me give you an example. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry gets dragged under by the Inferi. And by the way, I'm not talking about whether any of these things happen or whether or not you could expand them from the book. I'm just saying that the fact that they exist and they take up a lot of time. Harry gets dragged under by the Inferi, and it's a good 30, 40 seconds of the Inferi dragging him down. You see the cave wall. They had to put Daniel Radcliffe in a water tank to make this happen. They're animating the Inferi in the background, and they're color correcting. They're spending a lot of money on these shots for a fake out that is not going to trick anybody. If you read the book, you know Harry does not die. And if you're watching the movies for the first time, you're not going to think Harry died when there's 2 movies left to watch. So it kind of defeats the whole point of that fake out. It doesn't really add drama if we're not fooled. So cut it out. That extra 30, 40 seconds could have been used for Snape to explain why he's called the Half-Blood Prince. It's the title of the movie. And in the film, unlike the book, we get no explanation for why his name is the Half-Blood Prince. He just says he is. But why? Again, I know because I read the books, but if you've only watched the movies, you're kind of out of luck for answers. There are some good additions, like when they all hold up their wands and the light dispels the darkness of the Dark Mark. That's kind of touching back to Dumbledore's little, even in the darkest of places, if you just turn on the light, that's a great little way of tying that back around in the film where he dies. So that's awesome, but not all of the additions are like that. Most of them just take up space and runtime. Another example of this would be when in Goblet of Fire, Harry and the dragon just leave the challenge and fly all over Hogwarts grounds. The scene is way too long. It also has a fake-out death scene in it. It's in the middle of the movie. Nobody is going to be fooled by it. Why is it there? Now, granted, they did shorten it. The director originally wanted to burn down the Forbidden Forest. I'm not joking. Go look that up. It's honestly kind of hysterical that anybody could make such a terrible decision, but luckily cooler heads prevailed and they didn't do it. But nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with the way it was scripted in the book. Just have Harry summon the firebolt, jump on it, grab the egg. It's not that hard. And the time you saved would have allowed you to actually put some of the mystery back in Goblet of Fire, a movie in which all of the mystery has been completely cut out, despite the fact that all the Harry Potter books are mystery novels. Now, finally, there's two things I want to point out, and I did do a video about this, so I'll keep it short. But this is my last and the most important thing to my mind. The first is the theology around the soul, and the second is the end of the series. So in the movie, they completely cut out the fact that killing rips your soul in half. It's mentioned, but only to set up how Horcruxes are created. And beyond that, it's never mentioned again. But in the books, there's this huge drive that Harry has to be able to defeat Voldemort without killing him. Because if Harry rips his own soul in half, it would actually be a detriment. The idea behind this is that actually your soul is so valuable and so pure and precious that you have to keep it whole. And that's what makes us different than Voldemort, is trying to keep our souls intact, right? Going out and murdering in cold blood, that actually will damage somebody. And in this case, that's why Harry has been built up as this paragon of compassion, so that even at the end, he has learned so much compassion that he has more of a right to hate Voldemort than any other human being. Yet, when face to face in the final battle, Harry is like, Tom, listen, this is your last chance. For your own salvation, try to feel some regret and remorse, because regret and remorse is the only way you can heal the shattered remnants of your soul. Again, this is theology. It is actually a Christian idea. JK is Christian. And it's a beautiful way of working it all together, because in that moment, Harry is actually offering his worst enemy the chance of redemption. This is a kid who goes from the third book wanting to kill Sirius Black to, by the end of the series, offering the worst mass murderer of all time the chance to not be in hell. That's awesome. That's actually a wonderful message of compassion, the sort of compassion that we're supposed to have. In the movie, it is completely destroyed. It is botched beyond all recognition. The end is a really terrible fight scene between Voldemort and Harry, in which it is not clear at all that Harry does not want to kill Voldemort. And in fact, earlier on in that movie, we have Voldemort mentioned, and how Harry doesn't stand a chance against him, and Harry goes, well, I guess I'll have to kill him before he finds me. That is not Harry Potter. That is a completely different character. So I'd like to see that more than anything else. They could botch most of the series, in fact, no worse than the movies did, and I would still forgive it if they just kept that element, because it's kind of the center of the entire books. Harry being pure of heart, and Voldemort not being pure of heart. But even the hope that Voldemort could be redeemed. There's even that moment in the final confrontation where it says that Voldemort, his face kind of falters a little bit, like even he's not sure anymore. So it's that kind of hope that anybody actually could be saved that makes Harry Potter such a unique piece of fiction, when any other fantasy book series would have ended with the big fight scene like the movie did. So by doing that, they actually made Harry Potter really generic and kind of stripped one of the things that made it such a wonderful series. So I want to see that in the Deathly Hallows miniseries more than anything else, or the Deathly Hallows season, however you want to put it. That's what I want to see the most. So thank you everybody for watching. Let me know in the comments what you are looking forward to, or what you want to see in this series, or the things you don't want to see. Maybe there's something in the books you'd really hope they just cut out. So let me know about that in the comments, because I love to hear some different ideas. And maybe there's some things that you'll point out to me that once I hear it, I'm like, yeah, that totally should have been on the list. So thank you everybody for watching. God bless you, and I will see you in the next one.